1 year after Israeli jets intercepted Iran's last gamble to save Bashar al-Assad, Syria's new Islamist government faces fresh battles not on the front lines, but over the future of the nation itself. Kurds demand federalism. Minorities live in fear. Israel warns against Syria's collapse into fragments, and behind the scenes, Gulf states step in to bankroll a fragile peace. This is the new fight for Syria: unity, power, survival. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu revealed on April 27 that Israeli warplanes last year intercepted Iranian aircraft en route to Syria, blocking an effort to deliver troops intended to shore up embattled Syrian President Bashar al-Assad. Speaking at a conference hosted by the Jewish News Syndicate in Jerusalem, Netanyahu offered fresh insight into Israel's thinking during Assad's final days in power prior to his overthrow by Islamist-led insurgents last December by Turkey. But Iran, understanding that there are amazing, unbelievable investment in the Axis. This is the Axis. You have to have continuum to supply Hezbollah. And that was going down the tubes. And so they had to rescue Assad. And what they did was they wanted to do was to send 1 or 2 airborne divisions to help them. And we stopped that. We sent some F-16s to some Iranian planes that were making some routes to Damascus. They turned back. So instead of any support from the West and any support from the East, the Assad regime collapsed. And just to make sure, we destroyed 90% of their armaments of the army. The remarks in his speech gave a new glimpse into Israel's thinking during Assad's final days in power prior to his overthrow by Islamist-led insurgents last December 2024, in the days leading up to the fall of Assad. Israel had observed Tehran sending troops to bolster the Syrian leader and warned it against taking the opportunity to smuggle weapons across the border into Lebanon. Meanwhile, fresh from a visit to Syria, Republican Congressman Marlin Stutzman, one of the first U.S. lawmakers to meet the country's new Islamist president, cautioned against Israeli efforts to divide Syria, which remains in the early stages of recovery following Assad's collapse. In an interview with the Times of Israel on April 25th, Stutzman recounted his meeting with Syrian President Ahmed al-Sharaa, who reportedly expressed openness to joining the Abraham Accords, the series of normalization agreements between Israel and several Arab states, but raised several concerns. The first concern, which I felt was most important to him, was that Israel may have a plan to divide up the nation of Syria into multiple parts. That was something that he was very opposed to. The division al-Sharaa referenced appears to concern reports that Israel has been lobbying Washington to consider rejecting his nascent government in favor of establishing a decentralized system of autonomous ethnic regions with a demilitarized zone along Syria's southern border near Israel. Stutzman said he understood al-Sharaa was opposition to such a plan, that I would agree with Syria that keeping Syria unified would be important for the country to heal, grow, and move forward. Sharon's idea is to have more of a nationalist government under the Syrian banner. And that's critical because Syria has such unique and diverse groups of people, whether it's religiously or culturally or through their different sects that are in the country. The Syria's Islamist leadership warned on April 27th that Kurdish demands for a dissenter-allied system of government posed a direct threat to the country's fragile national unity in the post-Assad era. We clearly reject any attempt to impose a partition or create separatist cantons under the terms of federalism or self-autonomy without a national consensus. The unity of Syrian territory and its people is a red line. The statement followed a meeting in Qamishli on April 26th, where rival Syrian Kurdish parties, including the dominant faction in the Kurdish-controlled northeast, agreed on a common political vision for the future on what could. When we ensure Syria's decentralization, we believe that political decentralization means federalism. Some partners in the country are sensitive towards the word federalism. But we say federal because federal states are the strongest in economic, military, and all other sectors, that we believe that a decentralized federal Syria would be better for Syria's future. In conclusion, the conference decided to form a joint Kurdish delegation as soon as possible to work on realizing this vision of federalism into a political fact and to contact and speak with the concerned parties to reach their demands. The development comes as the Kurdish-led Syrian Democratic Forces, or SDF, backed by the United States, last month signed a landmark deal with Damascus. The agreement merged Kurdish-led governing bodies and security forces into Syria's central government structure, a move touted as a step toward reinforcing national unity. However, tensions have since flared. The Syrian presidency criticized recent SDF statements advocating federalism, accusing the Kurdish leadership of contravening the spirit of the March 10th agreement signed between President Sharaa and SDF. Commander Farhad Abdi said during Syria's 14-year civil war, Kurdish-led groups seized control of roughly a quarter of the country's territory, including vast oil reserves and some of its most fertile fire. Kurdish officials have long voiced concerns over the way Syria's new Islamist rulers are steering the transition away from Bashar al-Assad's decades-long reign, accusing them of monopolizing power and failing to honor promises of inclusivity. The push for federalism has gained traction among Kurdish groups amid growing alarm from Syria's minorities following last month's mass killings of Alawites. Kurdish leaders have accused the al-Assad government and its Islamist allies of setting the wrong course for Syria's future. While a final Kurdish political framework is yet to be officially unveiled, sources suggest federalism remains at the heart of Kurdish demand for Saudi Arabia, and Qatar have agreed to settle Syria's outstanding debt to the World Bank, a move likely to revive international support for the war-ravaged country. In a joint statement released on April 27th, the finance ministries of both Gulf nations confirmed they would pay Syria's nearly $15 million debt. The decision was taken during this month's meetings of the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund in Washington. Syria's foreign ministry welcomed the move, describing it as an important step towards reviving cooperation aimed at recovery and reconstruction following a 14-year conflict that claimed 500,000 lives and devastated much of the country since the fall of Bashar al-Assad's government. Saudi Arabia and Qatar have emerged as key backers of Syria's new leadership. The United Nations estimated in 2017 that rebuilding Syria would require at least $250 billion. Some experts now warn the figure could exceed $400 billion. Syria's infrastructure has suffered extensive destruction since the conflict erupted in March 2011. In a related development, Qatar began supplying Syria with natural gas via Jordan last month in a bid to alleviate the crippling electricity shortages that have become commonplace. However, development efforts continue to face major hurdles, chiefly Western sanctions imposed more than a decade ago, largely targeting Assad-era officials and institutions. The United States has yet to formally recognize Syria's new government, now led by its figure and interim president Ahmad al-Sharaa. Despite this, Washington has begun easing some restrictions. In January, the U.S. Treasury issued a 6-month general license authorizing certain transactions with the Syrian government, including energy sales. Meanwhile, the European Union has started to roll back some sanctions targeting Syria's energy, transport, and banking sectors. Measures against oil, gas, electricity, and aviation industries have been suspended. The British government also announced on April 24th that it had lifted sanctions against a dozen Syrian entities, including government departments and media outlets.